Welcome back to the Enfield 8000s. As you can see, there are two examples here. The red one is currently road legal, one of the very few in the UK, and the orange one, whilst a working unit and on its original control system, is currently a restoration project, probably due to be on the road later 2024 or 2025. Let's have a quick look round these vehicles. So these little vehicles were built in 1974 and 1975. Body shuttles certainly were generally assembled on the Isle of Sirros, and they have 4 batteries in the front, as you can see here, that are connected in pairs. So this is the first pair, this is the second pair. That gives you 2 12-volt blocks. Then in the rear there's another 2 pairs that give you another pair of 12 volts. Put all pairs in series and you have 48 volts, and then you also can use the individual 12-volt cells. So the traction battery power is controlled by the 2 sets of electromechanical switches that are in the passenger and the driver's footwells underneath the seats directly. These are powered by a control battery, which delivers power for the lights, wipers, indicators and any other auxiliaries, as well as controlling the actuation of the contactors beneath the seat. The red car's been modified with a slightly more modern Curtis controller, so it doesn't retain its original control gear and so operates in a slightly different way, despite the fact that it retains its control system on the dashboard. The dashboard of the Enfield contains a gauge which monitors the traction batteries and another gauge which gives you an idea of the amount of power in the smaller battery doing all the controls. This small red button is to do with the charge system, which is on board, and when it's plugged in you can press that to activate the control system. When the car is flat or the batteries are low in charge, the big transformer that's underneath here that actually physically doesn't work anymore on this car is powered up, and there's a 48 volt and a 12 volt relay there which powers and controls and charges both the control battery and the main traction batteries. This is done via 2 control boxes which are on board. This one, which the cover is temporarily removed from, will be retained for cosmetic purposes but won't actually be used. This one is the rectifier side, and on the other side we have the blue fronted dial, which is the control system for how long the charger is actually operating for. Again, one for 48 volts and one for 12 volts. This car, when I got it, I was told that the reason it had come off the road was because the charger was starting to smell. So needless to say, I'm not going to reuse it. However, it will retain the original plug that you plug the car into, and you have to plug it back into the car in order to make the control system work. There is also a 48 volt charge point here where you can plug in a 48 volt charger onto the Anderson connector here, and that will charge the 48 volts directly, but not the 12 volt one. Then we have a series of lights at the top which are to do with the actual motor concerned. The only one that's obvious is the blue one, which is the main beam. The yellow one, of course, is usually oil, but there's no oil in an engine because there's no engine, so that is used for the indication. The green one is actually used for when you turn the ignition on, and you can hear it click behind me, and you get a green light to show the car is ready to go. And then, providing the override switch is not on, when you press the accelerator the car will just move, but if the overrider is on you get a red light on the far left indicating that some sort of emergency stop or some sort of actuation has been completed. In the centre of the dashboard there's a 0 to 60 speedometer, which is really unusual. We can't work out what car it was actually fitted to. It is backlit. It does have a trip down here which resets the mileometer on the screen, and the 3 little indicators are not used on this vehicle. To the left there is an emergency stop button, which is actually a normal Lucas dip switch painted red, and when you press that, that's what activates the red light, And then below that you've got various controls. So we've got a wiper control, we've got the lights on and off and side lights, we've got a heater for the fan, and then despite the fact it says otherwise, we've got a control there for the heated screen. Immediately below that we have an indicator light to tell us when the heated screen is on, and a little push button which operates the wiper washer unit. The car is also fitted with hazard warning lights, and the traditional Lucas switch operates this on the dashboard, and you pull it and illuminates it. The stalk on the side of the steering column pushes for a horn and goes up for indication and down for indication, and also has the control for main beam on. The most important control, of course, is to be able to turn the key on and off, and doesn't use the start position. And then reverse and forwards is actually this little push switch. So on this car, you push to go forward and pull to go reverse. And you can hear on the opposite side, as I push that and pull that, you can hear the actuators reversing the car. So we have a bank of contactors on here. These two actually reverse the power when you pull and push the reverse switch. The other two put the windings inside the motor into parallel or series operation. This allows the motor to run at a slower speed and a faster speed on the same voltage. The only other remaining contactors in the passenger tray are the two little ones, one of which, the near side one here, is turned on when the key is and activates everything, and the other one actually is for the heater, allows the elements of the heater to use the traction battery in order to be able to power the hot element of the heater. The other big one is the main on and off contactor, which is put in by the first click as we press the accelerator pedal, and that activates the whole setup to make it start. On the driver's side, we have just three contactors which take the blocks of battery power and converts them from 12 to 24 to 48 volts. When the car is off, the contactors are all open, so every one of these are open, and the car is connected to 48 volts so it can be charged. When you turn it on, you hear the click on the passenger side, and as you push the accelerator pedal down, that makes the contactors operate. So as you push the accelerator pedal, you can see that the contactors all energize. That's now giving us 12 volts. When we push it down again, it will then release the middle one, which will now give us 24 volts. And then if we push it another 2 stages, it will actually go back to 48 volts. So that's how the speed is controlled, by changing the voltage. The clicks that you hear in between are the passenger side operating the motor coils so that they're in parallel in series. So the accelerator controls this drum that you can see down the bottom here. It's a green aluminium painted drum, and as you press that, you can see that that turns, and it's operating a pile of micro switches that are underneath the wiring that you see immediately above it. As these micro switches actuate, they actually operate the contactors. So that's purely and utterly the control system. This is a fairly early car in production and still retains its original rotary throttle. Later cars had a linear one that went up and down and was less likely to get confused. The early cars like this did have instances where they got stuck in full forward mode and there was no way of actually stopping them. Slight problem, as you can imagine. To cater with this issue, the car was either retrofitted or immediately fitted soon after production with this cutout switch here, which if you push it, you can see that the back end pops out, and that disconnects the power directly along these two cables to the motor brushes. So the motor that sits underneath the main gearbox tunnel, and the brushes are at this end, and the back of the motor here you can see the rubber donut connecting the short prop shaft and the rear of the motor. So the motor is really heavy and I can only just physically lift it. However, once it's disconnected, it will then roll to a stand. Most of the early cars were fitted with this heated screen. that heats up between the top power line and the bottom power line, with the positive energy coming up this line and going in here, and the neutrals being collected in the middle. It's a smart way of defrosting the screen when you've got no hot engine to give you any hot air at all. Another commonly specified optional extra was the addition of an electric heater, seen here. So the hot air comes out of the top and is on my car directed into the footwells, and the Smith's electric heater has got elements inside that heat up off the traction batteries, and the motor at the end is operated by the 12-volt control. All cars seem to have this connector here, this chocolate block connector, which was designed to take the power to the heater, but not every car seems to have been fitted. The cars boast an aluminium body on the outside. This was handmade, almost bespoke to order for the car individually, but towards the end of production this was a little bit more refined, and parts were pressed, and even chassis sections were made in batches. Each car, particularly the earlier ones, seemed to be slightly different. Looking at my bodywork, you can see where the aluminium at the moment is still loose, so the whole side of the wing is actually completely left loose and is just pop riveted onto the sill panel here. I've had to replace this steel section of sill panel because it was completely rotted through, and I'm still waiting just to put that back on. But the wings just pull over these steel lips, so you do get a little bit of non-like metal corrosion, which is unfortunate, particularly when some of the areas collect water quite badly. The floor pans on mine have had quite a lot of repair, and all this steel work on the inside is all new, refabricated, and the chassis itself is generally made up of this 1-inch square steel box section. The early cars have these rounded inner wings, and the later cars are a little bit more angular, and likewise some of the later cars acquire a lot more embossing on the floor, as they seem to have acquired a bead roller at some point during the production. The cars boast a lot of unique parts, but equally so borrow parts from other vehicles. So for instance, we have Austin Allegro headlamp units, Scimitar front indicator light units. The windscreen wiper arms are Ford based. Whilst the hubcaps are unique, the wheels themselves are Mini based and should actually be Mini Cooper ones with holes in. They're the wider wheels, presumably to cope with the greater weight. The door handles are Avenger, but the sliding window mechanisms are recognisably Mark I Mini. The door handles are Austin, and the internal operating doors are MGB. This car's got white interior. White and black seem to be the common options. You can see it's got quite decent seats, which are reasonably comfortable, but the rear seat was advertised as an occasional seat. It actually got the facility to put a spare wheel in onto this access, and some of them have a little spare wheel cover, and then you've got the rear battery cover at the back. The headlining is quite high, and you can actually sit quite happily inside the car with a hat on. And once you sit inside the doors have got these little pockets which you can put a map or something like that into, and you can see the door itself is covered, and you've got these sliding Mark I windscreens. The view out the front is quite huge. The big unique curved windscreen is very unusual to the car, and it does appear to give you a huge amount of space. It is also heated, so you can see through it in the winter, and the interior mirror and the interior light are hand operated. You have to turn that on and off in order to be able to make it work. This car's at the moment isolated. The controls are quite nicely and easily seen, although the speedo is a little bit obscured by the rim of the wheel when you're driving it. The pedals are in quite a good position to hold, and of course there's seat belts fitted for the car and a little passenger ducket on this side. Once inside the car, the doors close quite nicely. Quite a comfortable car to ride and drive along in. Certainly got plenty of leg room, assuming you don't want to actually sit anything in the back at all. Turning to the rear, the Hillman Imp supplies the indicator and stop lamps, but the reflectors are unusual and we can't actually locate where they're from. The number plate lights are typical of the period as well. In terms of the running gear, the rear axle is Bond Bug, but the brakes are mini back plates. The front suspension has a unique made lower wishbone, but the other elements of the front suspension are based on Hillman Imp, and the speedo and the drive takeoff off the near wheel is the same, but again with Mark I mini back brakes and mini brakes. However, the brake master cylinder, despite the fact it being a hydraulic unit, is not Mark I mini. We think that's probably a Vauxhall based item and is metric thread compared with the rest of the car, which seems to be UNF. And while the steering wheel is Spring-Alex, the steering column is almost certainly Hillman Imp based, along with the shroud. And then the oddity. This seems to be almost certainly a VW handbrake gaiter from an early Polo. Most bizarre. So what are they like on the road? Well, the orange one has its original control system, so we're going to take that up the drive first, and you can hear all the clicks and the whirs that the control system make as it drives along. So when you turn the ignition on, you get the green light, and you then put it in forward control. You then take the handbrake off, and then you push with your foot on the accelerator pedal, and you can hear the contactors clicking in, and then the car just gently drives away, and you can hear the clicks as it gets faster. It's almost silent on the overrun, and the brakes work really quite well. So now in the red car from stand, because it's got a Curtis controller, you just hear the motor accelerate without the clicking, and it is reasonably quick. It travels up to about 30 miles an hour quite happily. We'll cruise at 35, 40 miles an hour, topping out at about 50 miles an hour downhill, but we'll certainly get to 40 miles an hour on the flat quite happily. The ride is relatively smooth, it's relatively quiet, the motor doesn't make a huge amount of noise, and you have the indication on the dash, and that's about it really. It's a really charming little car to drive on the road. So that sums up the experience of my pair of cars which I'm currently driving around. Do subscribe and look forward to doing more about the other cars I've got.